to a very special Not Just Filler podcast with myself, with State Rep Grant Filler. We're at the DeWitt District Library, and Jennifer Balcom, who is the director of the library, is going to tell us about libraries during a pandemic, funding, what they offer to the community. And I just want to say personally, right, I grew up in Ovid. I grew up in the big church right next to the library where they had to practically kick me out. And I was such a little kid, you know, just a little one when I was little, that sometimes they didn't know I was in there, so I'm sure they locked me in at some point. But just the magic and the joy of being with books, with movies, with computers now, obviously not when I grew up, it will always stick with me. I'll always know what a library feels like and feel that magic. So maybe you just want to give us a little background about, you know, how you got this job, how you took the position, and what you do every day.
Well, again, my name is Jennifer Balcom. I have been in this position as the director for 12 years. I've worked in libraries for more than 30 years. I'm so young, but I started in libraries when I went to college in 1989, right? And that was their first year with an automated card catalog system, like the university where I was at. So I would say over the course of the last 30 years, libraries have changed tremendously.
Just thinking personally, right? Ovid Library, it was just books, and then slowly it changes, and now it's like the full multimedia experience and more.
And more, and like even not just the last 10 years since I've been here, but the last 5 years in particular, there has just really been an explosion in terms of digital collections and resources and online sorts of things, which I'm sure we can talk about more when we talk about the services the library offers. But I've always been a reader. I can relate to your Ovid experience. I grew up in Indiana in a really small town, and I read every book practically in the kids' room, and the librarian had to be like, I wanted to go and read the books in the adult room, and she didn't really want me to. And I remember us having this like battle of wills over Gone with the Wind, because she didn't think that was an appropriate book for a fifth grader to be reading. But so I've always been a reader, and I kind of fell into libraries by accident. I went to college. Had to get, you know, my dad was a minister. We didn't have a lot of money. I had to get a work study job, and I procrastinated. And by the time there were jobs available, there were only 2 jobs left. One was cleaning the toilets in the dorms, and the other one was at the library. And so I ended up working at the library and ended up loving it. And then after graduating and getting a job in libraries and then going to library school. But part of the reason I became a director here, and I wanted to be, is that I've worked in libraries in lots of different places. We lived in New Mexico. I worked for the Albuquerque Public Library System. I lived in Georgia, where I worked for the Columbus Public Library System. And I worked in Ohio at the Toledo Lucas County Public Library System. I kind of was a trailing spouse for a number of years, and so got to work at all these places. And what I found is that if you get really excited and you have ideas and services and programs you want to try, the best way to have influence over those programs actually happening is to be in management and to be in leadership. Because a lot of times, especially in bigger systems with lots of branches, it's very bureaucratic.
Sure.
And so that's why I wanted to be a director. And that's what makes me excited about being at DeWitt, because we can try. And because we're the perfect size, we can try, maybe not in terms of building size, but we can really try some cool and different stuff. Can
you just give me a laundry list of what you offer for the community, what's in this physical building? Maybe just roll through. People might not even know. I mean, my daughter came here as part of the kids class, and, you know, they would get books read to them, and Claire's very vocal, right? She's kind of yelling out the answer early, very much like her dad. But it was a good socializing experience. It was good to get her comfortable with books, you know, when she's 1, 2 years old. So.
Absolutely. Well, they say readers become leaders. Like the more you read to your child, the more likely, or their ability to read will make them more successful later in life. And what do we offer? What we offer now is a little bit different than what we offered a year ago at this time. Prior to the pandemic, we were offering 5 story times a week, like 2 preschool story times, a music and movement program, and they all had waiting lists because we don't have a lot of programming space. We have a 700 square foot space in Shavy Row Plaza directly behind us where we do a lot of our programming. We still are doing story times. We do 2 like virtual story times a week, but we're not doing a ton of children's programming virtually. Like we are to meet the needs of our community, but we're also cognizant that if kids are in school virtually all day long,
sure,
the last thing their parents really want, and probably the last thing that they really want, is to be sitting in front of a screen more. So we're offering story times. We have read, I gotta make sure I say this right, read and take kits. They're like a story time to go. They're bundles of books on a theme with craft supplies in a bag.
We do that for Claire, and it is awesome.
And
because she opens, right? She opens and she gets
exactly.
excited.
And so there's stories with a theme with resources to do a story time at home. So we have that. We also are doing read and like make and take kits that are more craft oriented for teens and adults. And then our digital collections. Like one of the first things that we did when we needed to close, because we were closed for 3 months before we moved into our curbside phase, where we offer curbside service, is we put a lot of the money that we would put into physical books into digital resources, which we've always done. But we have several different digital resources. We have Overdrive and Hoopla, which are primarily ebooks and downloadable audiobooks. But we also have Flipster, which is digital magazines. Yeah. We've got Canopy, which is film, largely independent film or documentary. And we also have Mango Languages for language learning. I think there's 70 different languages in there.
And if people want to access this, all they do is get a library
card. Get a library card. And we give library cards, curbside. The other thing that people don't know that I think is really important for them to know is if your student is enrolled with DeWitt schools, they automatically, just with their student ID, have a digital library card at DeWitt. Okay. We started that in 2017 with just high school students. And then a year ago when the pandemic hit, Dr. Dieter contacted me and we decided to make that K through 12. Okay. So even if a kid or a child doesn't have a library card, they still have access to Flipster, Mango Languages, all the databases that we offer in terms of newspaper, magazine, ERIC searches, Melcat, all of that is available to them.
What's been the largest change, even in the last 5 years, in libraries in general? I know the obvious change from me growing up with just books to right. everything online, becoming a place you go to access the internet, obviously. Right. But what would you say in the last couple of years you've been seeing?
Part of it is, a lot of it is the technology. So 10 years or 12 years ago when I came to DeWitt, we didn't even have ebooks, but we've had ebooks for a decade. And initially people were saying, oh my gosh, ebooks, like libraries aren't going to be needed. They're going to go away. Yeah. I think the library is not just a book warehouse, but we're also a place, I think a good library is like the living room of the community. It's a place where people can gather and can connect and get connected with resources and maybe not just materials. But I think largely what we do here is the technology requirements are huge. I just listed probably 5 or 6 different digital resources that we sure. have available that staff have to be able to know how to use. And I think part of the reason that we were able to pivot so, I don't want to say seamlessly, because the last year has been really challenging in a number of ways, is that in order to be really good at a library, you have to be listening to your community and you have to know what people need. And part of that is the education with the technology. Like before we closed, we would get people in who would say, maybe an older person, I got this Kindle or I got this e-reader, I got this tablet and I have no idea how to use it. Like, how do I access the library resources? How do I print? How do I, and we've always been about information literacy, and we've also, which I think is even more important now when it comes to sure. connecting people and information and disinformation and misinformation and all that kind of stuff. But that's how we've changed. We're very technology driven, and a lot of it is staying on top of it ourselves so that we can understand what the community needs us to do. But also creating a space and a place for people to connect via programs and services. And like 5 years ago, now when you apply for a job, you almost have to apply online. Now, and this is even pre-pandemic, the Secretary of State is pushing SOS, Express, right? Like people are renewing their plates online, and people automatically assume that everybody has the internet. and they don't. One of the ways that we've major shifted in the last 5 years is that we have a Library of Things collection, which is, we literally have 40 hotspots that we check out to patrons.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Because there are people who do not have internet at home. And one thing that we learned when we were closed, because the state library requires us to have, to keep track of how many people log into the library's Wi-Fi. It's like one of the statistics we have to provide on our state aid report. And so one of the things that we learned during the pandemic is more than 300 people a month were using the library's Wi-Fi from the parking lot.
Oh.
So seriously, so you know that people need internet if they're coming and logging into the Wi-Fi from the parking lot. So we got the resources and we boosted the Wi-Fi so you could take it further into the parking lot, and we doubled the number of hotspots that we check out to people.
Okay.
So now people have the ability, and even at my house during the pandemic, I'm working from home, my husband's working from home, my son's a high schooler, he's taking classes from home. Even if you have the internet at home, your resources are stretched.
Sure.
So
Boy,
the
things we learn when we sit down with Jennifer. Tell us about the funding in a nutshell, and maybe some struggles or some wins that you've had.
Okay, so the public libraries in Michigan are funded by three different sources. One is tax revenue, property taxes. The other is penal fine revenue, and the third is state aid. And state aid is an incredibly small percentage. I think it's like 3% of our budget. Like we get less than $20,000 a year from state aid. Penal fine and tax revenues are the two main sources, and the library is only on the winter tax roll. So we're just now starting to get tax revenue from this previous year. I don't know how those revenues are going to be affected by the pandemic, but we did take about a $30,000 loss in penal fine revenue. And penal fine revenue is collected through either court costs or through speeding tickets in Clinton County. So what happens is as court costs come in and as speeding ticket revenue comes in, it goes to the county, and then the county disperses that per capita to all the public libraries in the county. So because police were patrolling less and because courts weren't open, the library took a hit there.
Yeah.
I think that we're fortunate in some ways because we're a district library, and what that means is that my library board is its own funding authority, where our tax revenue comes from the city of DeWitt and Watertown Township and DeWitt Township, but we're not under the township's or city's authority. We're not a city branch. And I think that city libraries or libraries that are funded through organizations that get more direct money from the state will probably be more affected than we will be affected. But, who knows what will happen as we go forward.
Yeah, I think we're all interested. I know in state government, we're very interested to see, because usually if you have a struggle, it shows up months or a year later. Okay. Anything else, Jennifer, that you want to tell the folks who watch the Not Just Filler podcast? I mean, I've got to say, this is a great library. It's a great space. It's so much more than a book holding area. Right. It's great for the kids. It's great for the community, and the technology is really high end. So we just appreciate you so much. But is there anything more that you just want people to know about libraries or DeWitt Library right here?
We went fine free in April.
Fine free.
Most people don't know that because we weren't charged. We suspended fines during the pandemic because people couldn't return things. So we went fine free, and part of that was studies are showing that fines are a barrier to access to libraries, especially for youth who maybe get materials at a library and are reliant upon the adult or the guardian in their life to get those material backs. And if people have a lot of fines or they lose a material, they probably are less reluctant to come back to the library and get access to the information they need. So that was part of the reason the library board made a decision. We offer notary services, which have been super
important.
You really? We do. We notarize. And sometimes, I know you can do that at the township.
That'd be really helpful.
You can do it at the bank, but sometimes the bank has limitations on what they'll notarize, which is interesting.
Okay.
So we have a couple notaries on staff. The staff here we have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we're always willing to try new things. And I think like right now we're having a winter reading program. It's entirely virtual. Our summer reading program was entirely virtual. We did a lot of scavenger hunt programs. We purchased an app called Goose Chase. And so this past summer, a lot of the programs that we were encouraging, like they were scavenger hunts. You had to do different activities, but you also had to go different places in the community. Maybe you had to go outside of business and do something, or maybe you had to go to a park, or maybe you had to go to the library story walk. So we're always looking for ways that we can collaborate and try to create more of a sense of community with, and we are about books too. I'm going to say we're not just about books. We really are. Yeah. We're primarily a popular materials library because we operate out of 5,600 square feet, which isn't it's a glorified house in my opinion.
Sure.
So every book in this library or DVD has checked out in the last 2 years. If it hasn't checked out in the last 2 years, unless it's like a super classic, we can't keep it. We just don't have the space for it. So we really try to stay on top of what patrons really want us to have. Sure. And we can complement that with digital resources, which is nice because for every book that's digital or movie or whatever, I don't have to have physical space for that material to be.
Yeah. So I guess one question I would say is when you walked into a library, what's the first thing you do? The first thing I do is look for a book. This morning, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, one of my favorites. What would be your book if you came into a library?
Sneetches and Other Stories by Dr. Seuss.
Oh, okay. A classic. And so I'm interested if you're watching, what would be your one book? So something magical about being in a library and reading. Obviously, they've changed a lot. I think you gave us a tremendous background. So thank you so much for what you do in DeWitt. And thanks for watching the Not Just Filler podcast.